past 2 days. And that's the news. Our next at 10 o'clock.
Now a Grotto of Peerless Delight, a celebration of the Hammersmith Palais. Here's Lionel Blair.
One of the world's most famous ballrooms is 80 years old this month.
Grand opening of the Palais de Danse, Brook Green, Hammersmith. Tuesday evening, the 28th of October at 8 p.m. The largest and most luxurious dancing palace in Europe. Accommodation comfortably for 2,500 people.
The building itself started out as a tram shed. This was just before the First World War. During the war, it was used as a warehouse, really, for aircraft that were being made down the road. Waring & Gillows was the firm. Once the war was finished, that the building was renovated at considerable cost, about £30,000, and established as the Palais de Danse.
Hammersmith Borough archivist Chris Jeans. Actually, the term Palais de Danse isn't French at all. It was imported from America, as was the music on that night in October 1919.
The opening publicity certainly paid off. On the opening night, the capacity for the Palais had been set at 2,500, but in fact, quite astonishing, 5,800 people turned up to hear the original Dixieland jazz band and Billy Arnold's American Novelty Band.
The original Dixieland jazz band played at the Palais for the first 6 months. Len Collier knows the Palais well. Later, he was to become a British dance champion there, but he recalls the excitement the opening of the Palais generated.
But I can remember when the Palais opened, a man named Byron Davis, who was a publicity man, and he, in those days, he said he did a trick through Oxford Street with 3 camels. And he had notices on the side. I've got the hump. So will you have if you don't go to Hammersmith Palais on such and such a date. And that's when the Palais opened.
The promenade of the Palais de Danse Hammersmith is one of the most sumptuous in London. Many who visit the Palais de Danse are non-dancers. They come along to watch the happy throng of dancers, to catch something of their sheer irresponsible merriment. 2 world-famous jazz bands provide the gayest of perfect dance music. Combined with the carefree atmosphere of the Palais de Danse, they will help you forget the worries of present-day conventional existence. 2 sessions daily, 3 to 6 p.m., 2 and 6pence, 8 to 12 p.m., 5 shillings.
I went to the Palais more or less just after it actually opened, when my memory is of a half-coloured dance band with a drummer that had a rack of things that had everything from literally the kitchen sink on it. Saucepans and goodness alone knows what, and he would do a big act with this and do all his business with these drumsticks on all these peculiar blessed instruments.
As the Roaring Twenties stormed in, the Hammersmith Palais was a very posh night out. The flappers and their beaux paid the princely sum of 5 shillings for their evening's entertainment. As the Palais came up to its first birthday, Hammersmith's MP, the Right Honourable Sir William Bull, gave his verdict on the new fashionable night spot in his constituency.
There were many doubts expressed as to the possibility of conducting an entertainment of this nature with propriety and good taste. But I have attended there on several occasions and have been struck with the care which is taken to ensure refinement of the entertainment.
As the Depression deepened in the 1920s, so the fortune of the Palais waned. It came to light that part of the cherished dance floor was only being supported by an old rubbish-filled well. In 1928, the Palais de Danse was converted into an ice rink. It stayed like that until 1935. However, the famous and wealthy still came. The Prince of Wales, later Edward VIII, came and skated at the rink. In 1935, the Palais reverted back to a ballroom, and it stayed that way ever since. When it was originally opened in 1919, there were 80 lady and gentlemen dance partners. Dancers for hire, if you like. In 1935, it was sixpence to dance with people like Len Collier.
The enclosure was called the pen. People used to come up to the cashier and ask for somebody. And they say they like the look of him, and dance with him. It was nothing extraordinary to do perhaps 30, 40 dances a night with all shapes, all sizes, all types, where it was necessary for us to make the lady, wherever she was, comfortable, let her enjoy herself, and let her imagine she was a very good dancer. And in many, many cases, unfortunately, she wasn't. There were one or two, it was like moving a 2-ton truck. But this is going to extremes, and we see one coming towards the pen on the odd occasion, you would run. All these funny stories one hears about the gigolo, as it was. The gigolo did apply, I must agree, on the continent, but it certainly didn't happen in the Hammersmith Palais. There were no rich widows looking for toy boys in those days.
And the resident band in 1935 was Oscar Rabin.
Could be that yellow moon is just a big balloon and not that yellow moon above. Could be your angel face is something out of space and not that angel face I love. Could be the card of mine is just a valentine and not this heart of mine at all. Could be a dream I see, but if you're asking me, could be I'm in love, could be.
That yellow moon is just a big and dandy balloon, and not that yellow moon above. La 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 la. Could be that angel face is something out of space, something out of space, and not the angel face I love. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Could be this heart of mine is just a valentine, babe. Could be it's a dream I see. But if you're asking me, could be I'm in love, could be.
Beryl Davis with the Oscar Rabin Band and Could Be. Rabin's orchestra played at the Palais till the outbreak of war. Through those 6 long years, the Hammy Palais enjoyed its greatest popularity. It became a focal point for civilians, servicemen and women from all over the world who came for a good night out.
Well, I think it was popular because it was on the west side of London, which was less likely to be bombed, and it was also in a residential area and away from factories that would be a military target. And also it was within easy reach of Aldershot and Windsor and places like that, where there were always lots of troops.
Oh, it was a massive place compared with some of the other dance halls that I'd been to.
It was a great big ballroom, always very well lit and with an excellent band.
That beautiful revolving stage where to us it was a wonder to have not only one band but two bands in those days, and the vast floor space. And if you didn't feel like dancing or you never had the energy to dance, you could have a marvellous time just sitting up around the balcony with a glass of lemonade or a glass of beer and watch other people do it.
Here am I, riding high, knocking wood and feeling good, and I know why. Got a date I can't delay, nearly 7:30 and it starts at 8. Gonna go dancing, dancing, Saturday night at the Palais. We don't care just what dance, jitterbug or spot dance. What's that number? Step out in a rumba. We're dancing, dancing, Saturday night at the Palais.
The Palais was where you met, let me quote a friend of mine's word, your talent.
It was boy meets girl. It was the usual thing one got in every dance hall in those days. The boys used to come in and sort out the best dancers and dance with them all night. Now, if they liked the look of them, they would take them home. But normally they found the pretty one who couldn't dance, and they only asked her for the last waltz.
The average age, I suppose, was between about 19 and 22. And we all spent the week sort of working hard at our wartime jobs. Some of the chaps would be flying over Germany every night, and the old tin aircraft they had then with just a sandwich and a thermos to keep them going for 5 or 6 hours it took to go to the Ruhr and back, and they were shot at all the time. And by the end of the week, they really deserved a good party.
As I said, if you wanted to look for a boyfriend in those days, that was the places that you found them, because that was the places that you let your hair down in.
Hey! Cut! Left! Cut! Swing! Stop! This is the Army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms, all telephone. You had your breakfast in bed before, but you won't have it there anymore. This is the Army, Mr. Green. We like the barracks nice and clean. You had a housemaid to clean your floor, but she won't help you out anymore. Oh, no. Do what the buglers command. They're in the Army and not in the band. This is the Army, Mr. Brown. You and your baby went to town. She had you worried, but this is war, and she won't worry you anymore.
If the Scots were there, it was the reels. If it was the Americans, it would be the jives or the square dances. But we danced all sorts of dances, from waltzes and quick steps and to the Palais glide.
The Army, Mr. Brown. You and your baby went to town. She had you worried, but this is war, and she won't worry you.
The standard of dancing was very mixed indeed. You either got people who had been taught by Miss Vakani, who trained the Queen, or else you got somebody who just had one lesson from his friends in the mess that night.
everybody appeared to be able to get round the floor, let's put it that way. They weren't necessarily good dancers, but they got round, which was something. And of course I was very keen on a high standard and so on. So the thing was, it was the same with any good dancer, you went there and looked around and very rapidly spotted somebody who could really dance. And from then on your night was made.
You didn't have to take a girl with you, but you'd always find enough partners inside to dance with. Or you just went and asked a girl if you could have the dance. And 9 times out of 10, it would be yes.
We didn't usually put on long dresses, although we liked to pretty up and not wear uniform if possible. We'd wear silk or a cotton short dress usually. And some of the girls who were dancing in the choruses of the shows would come, and they would come in their frillies that they'd had for the last act.
And you made sure that you had dancing shoes. The ballrooms itself were kept so well that you daren't go on in anything other than the proper equipment for dancing.
One of the problems was boots. We were all right. We were posh, we were aircrew cadets, so we had shoes. But of course, very few servicemen were issued with shoes. So it was a problem because the floor was rapidly getting ruined, of course, with people dancing on them with hobnail boots.
Carolina, I'm coming back to you. I feel finer, all those dreams I've had have all come true. Carolina, I have been so lonesome, now I'm glad I've saved up all my pennies to come home to Mom and Dad. Carolina, I'm coming back to you.
At the Palais in residence was the Oscar Rabin band. And of course he had the second band, the Embassy band. If you went during the week, those were the two bands that would be there. But on Sunday night, which you had to be a member to get in on a Sunday, you would occasionally get guest bands. And they were great nights. And the one I always remember is the night that Joe Loss was a guest band there. He was then playing at the Astoria, Tottenham Court Road. And we had a fabulous night with him and the Rabin band. The Rabin band would play tunes, we would say as a foxtrot, but the Joe Loss would play the same tune as a quick-step. And they varied their program like that, but they were absolutely terrific.
Often we'd have a singer as well, or a crooner as they called them.
If I remember rightly, it was a revolving stage. And there'd be one band on to start with. And then during, probably half-time, another band, the stage turned, and on came the other band. And they were all good bands, because they were made, especially for dancing.
Sometimes you'd be asked to dance by a very polite gentleman from mid-Europe who would bow from the waist, kiss your hand and ask you politely to dance. The next minute you'd be grabbed by an American who would say, "Come on, sister, let's jive."
I've got a close friend now in her 60s, and if you can imagine, she was a teenager in the war years. And the Americans was over here, oversexed, overpaid, and in the Palais. Now, the girls in this time all wanted the nylons. So she tells the story of how she went to the Brook Green, which is very close to the Palais, to get the nylons out of the Yank in the hotel. And when she gets there, there's no bathroom window that she can get out, and the Yank hasn't got any nylons. So Ruby thinks, my God, how am I going to get out of this? So while the Yank's taking down his trousers, Ruby grabs his wallet and runs. Where does she run? the good old Hammersmith Palais, where two burly policemen pick her up, and poor Ruby done 3 weeks in Holloway.
We used to get a bit jealous of the Frenchmen at times and seemed to capture all the good ladies, but nevertheless we had to put up with that.
Oh, and if there was an air raid, they just turned the microphone up louder and the lights down a bit lower, checked up the blackout curtains were okay, and we went on dancing. Nobody was going to put us off, not even the Hun.
Say it's only a paper moon sailing over a cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a muslin tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me.
The words and music of the Hammersmith Palais during the Second World War. The BBC broadcast regularly from the Palais. One of the hugely popular programmes was Services Spotlight, which was always announced as coming from the Palais, until the traitor Lord Haw-Haw threatened the place. Then the announcements renamed the venue as a dance hall somewhere in the south of England. In November 1945, the Palais scored one of its most impressive publicity coups. Lou Preager had become the resident band leader 3 years before. He persuaded the BBC to put up £1,000 as first prize for a Write a Song contest. Nearly 74,000 manuscripts poured in. One of Prager's 3 crooners at the time was Paul Rich.
By the time the final came round, most of the songs were waltzes, and it was so drab. And then in the final thing, the winning song of all the songs, and my least favourite, I have to tell you at the time, was this song called Cruising Down the River. And it was written by these 2 ladies, Nellie Tollerton and Eiley Bedell. I remember the final, the presentation. Ivan Novello came along to present the prize. Margaret Lockwood was there. And I remember the 2 ladies didn't know what had happened. They offered to buy me a drink, you know. I remember that Lou had the devil's own problem in getting the song published. The song had been on every major publisher's desk for weeks and weeks, and nobody would agree to publish it. They all said the same thing. There had not been a fast waltz hit since The Man on the Flying Trapeze, therefore they weren't interested. Sid Coleman, was a very well-known personality in music publishing circles in those days, and he ran a company called Cinephonic Music. And Lou had him in the dressing room and he said, listen, Sid, you've got to publish this song for me, the Hammersmith Palais, the BBC. He said, you're going to publish this song and I'm going to pay every expense involved in publishing this song. At which point Sid said, listen, if you really believe in it that much, he said, I'll do it just like that. And little did he know that he just signed the second largest seller since the Lambeth Walk. It was at the top of the hit parade in England. It was at the top of the American charts for 6 months. They made a film in glorious Technicolor with Betty Grable and Jack Carson called Cruising Down the River. These two old ladies must have made a fortune. And I understand that only one of them actually wrote the song in her head. She went to her friend who was the piano teacher, I'm not sure which way around it was, and she said, listen, you write it down and we'll go halves.
Cruising down the river on a Sunday afternoon, with one you love, the sun above, waiting for the moon. The old accordion playing a sentimental tune, cruising down the river on a Sunday afternoon. The birds above all sing of love, a gentle sweet refrain. The winds around all make a sound like softly falling rain. Just two of us together plan a honeymoon, while cruising down the river on a Sunday afternoon. Just two of us together plan a honeymoon, while cruising down the river on a Sunday afternoon.
Just after the war, the Ted Heath Band was the hottest thing around. They played a number of guest nights at the Palais. Some of the crowd they attracted came to dance, but some just came to listen. Fans like trombonist Don Lusher.
We were due back off leave that night, my friend and myself, and we decided to go. As a matter of fact, to give you an idea of the popularity of the band, we were outside queuing for about an hour, and then we got in. They were on at 8:30. We got in the building at 8 o'clock, and there was a barricade round the stand, and at that time, we were about 6 back from that barricade. It was fantastic, and the concert, or the dance sets, finished at 11 o'clock at night, and we knew we wouldn't have time to get to Liverpool Street Station to get the boat train back to Germany. And we overstayed and, of course, were queried by the Red Caps at Liverpool Street. And when we got back to Germany, I remember I got 7 days. I got the money stopped for a week and 7 days confined to barracks, but it was well worth it.
Another musician who went to listen was Benny Green.
I can't dance, never could dance. And a group of us who were jazz fans went to see Ted Heath's band at the Hammersmith Palais, and we weren't just non-dancers, but we made a virtue of refusing to dance, because that would pollute the music. You were there to listen to the purity of the music, and if you danced, you were an idiot because you were distracting from the music, etc. Very bigoted and priggish. And we were up in the balcony, and this mass, this seething mass of maybe 1,000 people all dancing to Ted Heath, and the noise was terrific. We were trying to listen to the band. And below us, just below where we were sitting on the balcony, there was a string of about 6 chaps. This was pre-Teddy Boy days, but they were the equivalent of Teddy Boys, and they were very sharp cats. And they had obviously had this thing rehearsed. They were in a line, like chorus girls, and they'd worked out this sort of jive dancing routine, and it was very glib and smart. And, of course, we were sitting there burning with envy because we couldn't dance at all. And we also thought, what oafs they are, they're not listening to the music. So, being oafs ourselves, which we were teenagers, we threw a few pennies down. And this disrupted the proceedings so badly, these fellas, their egos were absolutely destroyed. They're these rampant show-offs suddenly brutally smashed to pieces by a shower of pennies. And we thought it was very funny, and we sit there. And then suddenly there's a commotion along the gangway up on the balcony, and these dancers are bearing down. And they suddenly looked very ugly customers. And it all happened in a flash, and we thought, this is it. We're going to get thrown over the balcony. It's the end of us. And they swept straight past us, and set about a group of innocent chaps about 3 or 4 seats further along. They'd miscalculated where the pennies were coming from. We were terrified but overjoyed at this mistake, and we immediately, instantly, instinctively, without saying anything to each other, got up, ran the other way along the thing, down the steps, across the floor, out of the building, into the tube station where a train was standing, threw ourselves into the train, the doors shut, and we were off. And we then congratulated ourselves on having got away with it. Now, I never found out how serious the riot was, but as we left, there were at least 100 people mauling and punching and throwing chairs about without knowing what they were doing. But I'm afraid it was us.
The Palais continued to do good business throughout the 50s. In December 1955, the first regular TV programme for the Palais was broadcast on the new independent television. Terry Thomas and Jill Day starred in the first edition of Palais Party. For much of Lou Preager's 18 years residency at the Palais, Phil Tate was the leader of the relief band. By the mid-50s, music was changing. Phil Tate recalls how the Palais gave a new rock and roll star one of his first British public appearances.
Bill Haley was the Beatles of that time and tremendous fan appeal. And he made a personal appearance. We couldn't get him onto the stage, or we daren't even put him into the ballroom because he would have been mobbed. So he made a brief appearance on the balcony. We spirited him in quietly through a back door onto the balcony. And he really just stood there and let them look at him, and they roared their approval. It was quite a fantastic night. I'll never forget the night, but it was quite dangerous because, you know, he was so popular. Very few artists really, well, I haven't seen anybody, at Hammersmith anyway, who received such an ovation. He didn't play, no.
Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. Rock and roll!
The Palais also encouraged homegrown talent. Here's 50s rocker Rory Blackwell.
Yeah, 1956, that was the very first rock and roll jamboree they put on. What they were doing is, the venues in London were all much too small, so they said, right, Hammersmith Palais. And they put a rock and roll jamboree, they called it, and I don't think the Palais were quite ready for it, because there was just over 12,000 people squeezed in one way or another, because it was jiving then, of course, and the only time you really got to jive was when they played this set with the sort of, it was a mambo and a rumba and a samba or something, and one would jive to that. Rock and roll comes out, hits the scene, and everybody's up in arms, jiving about and jitterbugging. There's no getting away from it. Hammersmith Palais was the venue. Greatest atmosphere ever. There was a riot with nothing broke, if you know what I mean.
But not all the rock and roll events held at the Palais were as successful as that 1956 jamboree. Here's Benny Green.
By the time I worked there, 59, would it be, or 60, it was very seedy and kind of decrepit and run down, I thought. Anyway, I worked there one night, and it was a very strange circumstance. I had owed the income tax some money and decided to take a job to get some money rather than for musical reasons, and I worked with Lord Rockingham's 11, which was a television rock band whose pretensions were slightly lower than the soles of my boots. And it was a terrible band, but very popular. And we were top of the hit parade. That's how bad we were. And we one night, I don't know how it came about, but we were told we were going to do a one-night stand at Hammersmith Palais in the middle of the week. And I thought that it was a strange thing for us to do, but I was very happy because I wanted to have said I'd played at Hammersmith Palais. It was about the only place I hadn't played at. And we did this dance at Hammersmith Palais, and I was delighted to discover about 11 people turned up. So I thought, well, there is hope for the world anyway, at last.
The next great band leader to have a long-term home at the Palais was Joe Loss. He played there as a guest band from before the war, but he took up residency on Boxing Day, 1959.
I was visiting the Earl's Court at the time. A friend of mine, the boxing promoter, Jack Solomons, had a big championship on there. And he introduced me to Claude Langdon, who was then the owner of Hammersmith Palais. And Claude said, well, why don't you come along the Palais and work for me? So he says, not worried about you, it's your poor wife. All these years you've been touring up and down the country. Come and settle down in London. So as I'd done everything in the way of playing all types of establishments, I thought it over and we managed to get together and I went there. But the remarkable things, those days it belonged to Claude Langdon, but it wasn't very long before I met the late Carl Hyman, who was the head of Mecca dancing. And Carl Hyman said to me, he said, if I've got to buy the Palais, I'll have you working for me yet. And they did. Mecca's bought it out a few years later.
Mecca bought the Palais in 1960. The Hammersmith Palais has always been able to boast that it's the home of ballroom dancing in this country. Joe Loss, who played there for 10 years, remembers the dancing.
In the way of recreation, if one comes to think of it, the average working boy or girl, what could he do for entertainment? That dancing was their life. And that's why when one sees a man of 70 or 80 on the floor, they're still the best dancers, providing they went to the Palais. The Palais was the house of learning, where you learnt your trade as a dancer. And if you didn't learn how to dance, it meant no girls, you're on your own, whereas it's opened up everything. When I went there, they always had big events there because they could hold thousands of people those days. There's no limit to the amount they could get there. And having such a large space of floor, it's rather remarkable. The people used to come up to me at the bandstand and say, there's no room. It's amazing. The dancers who like to take large strides and swing around the floor used to have a dozen couples on. When the room could hold thousands of dancers, they used to complain, no room. But that is the story that every serious dancer will tell you. The management always worked on the idea, we must get the best exhibitions, the best dancers, the best competitions. And with that, they drew the crowds.
Some of the strict tempo dancers could get carried away. Often for the poorer dancers or losers in the competitions, the band was to blame.
They couldn't dance very well, and they used to stand beside the bandstand with a stopwatch. And at first I couldn't believe it. They used to come up to me and say, you're playing 30 bars a minute instead of 32. Oh, that waltz was 29. You know it should be 31 bars a minute. And they used to drive me round the bend. And I'm sure they did to every other band leader that worked there. But they were no good, because a good dancer virtually, provided you're within a bar or two, could dance to any tempo. I mean, we learned the tricks of the trade. When they entered competitions, they used to say, slow down the quick step a bit and we'll get more steps. And people say, how could they do that on the quick step?
Joe Loss and his orchestra, in full cry there, with a song I wrote with Joe called Must Be Madison. I remember that very well because with my dancers, I gave a demonstration at the Hammersmith Palais of the Madison. And I remember after doing our spot, I encouraged the crowd to come behind me and dance with me. And I thought one or two might join in, but it wasn't the case. The entire ballroom got behind me and my dancers, and we all demonstrated the Madison. It was a really great night. The 60s was a decade of change.
It started its decline then. It took some time before it completely went, but I mean, there weren't enough people really to keep the afternoons open. I mean, it all started really in the late 50s when rock and roll and Presley, etc. came in. This is when the age groups started to split, and you get the separate music for the youngsters, and the older people wanted something different. And that was really the start of the decline. I mean, there's still, as you know, a healthy interest in ballroom dancing, but not a general interest as it was then. I would say throughout the 60s, it gradually tailed off.
You could still trip the light fantastic through the 70s and 80s at the Hammersmith Palais, although increasingly few people did. In 1987, Mecca closed the Hammersmith Palais de Danse for the last time. They spent £2 million on a 6-month facelift, and the new Le Palais nightclub opened at a royal charity night on June 5th, 1987. Inside now, a smaller dance floor, 2 restaurants, and what the publicity blurb insists is the most spectacular light show ever seen in Europe. Well, we took some older Palais gliders to look around the new Le Palais to see what they thought.
We've got the 1930s things on here. We're going back 40 years from there. I remember the stage being there, and the sirens used to come through here straight at you. And you had it was the balcony. You used to sit underneath that balcony and leave your handbag underneath one of the chair. I got it nicked once. I can't get over the small side of the ballroom. No. I mean, much smaller, isn't it? Well, they don't move, do they, when they dance now? They just go like this. Smaller, much smaller. I mean, I like to. I mean, a few waltzes and you'd be. The bar was always.
When we used to go dancing, the lights used to be on the whole time. You see, when you used to have the spot horses, you know, then they used to shine the light. And you used to get, when the dance stopped, if it shone and you won a prize, spot prizes they called them.
Yeah,
Remember the spot prizes?
yes, but it used to be throwing out.
What was the chuck-outable offence in those days?
Well, if you did this just about, if you'd continued with it, you would get thrown out. No, I was never, I'm not as bad as all that. There's a bar up there, there's a bar here.
Well, when we was that age, we couldn't afford to drink at the bar. All we'd do was dance.
If a fella asked you to have a drink, you'd have a, an orange drink or something.
Oh, yes, we never get intoxicated.
Well, if you did, you only had one.
What you did, what Mother told you. Anyway, it's interesting to come and see it now,
thanks for
but it doesn't impress me at all.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to come here again, not to have to go out dancing. Would you?
For 80 years, the Hammersmith Palais had adapted to changing public fads and fashions to survive. For the people who danced and played there, I guess it'll always be somewhere very special. As Sir William Bull, MP for Hammersmith, said at its opening, it's a grotto of peerless delight. Here's a few last thoughts from Phil Tate, Benny Green and Don Lusher.
When you walk into that place, it's like going back all those years, and you look for the old things, you look for the old dressing rooms, and there's a certain smell, not a put-off smell at all with it, but there is a certain odour with it. There's a certain element of all the artificial lighting and that sort of thing, and it really takes you back.
It's become a kind of London monument now, and I think that now, if anybody wanted to redevelop it, it's so old and so venerable that maybe somebody would say it was a protected building, or it ought to be. If you think of all the music that's gone on there and all the action that's happened there, and I would be sorry to see it go because it's an integral part of London.
Whatever condition it might have been in the question of decor, it had something that many other places will never have, and that was a tremendous atmosphere, merely through the years that it had been in existence, right from 1920 or so. It's like all sorts of places, like the Albert Hall. It's a place that's got something in the walls there, and it doesn't really matter what paint you put over it. That atmosphere's still in there, and it's still in there now.
We don't care just what dance, get about or spot dance. What's that number? Step out in a rumper with dancing. Saturday night at the Palais. Saturday night ain't the loneliest night at the
Ah, nostalgia indeed. A Grotto of Peerless Delight was presented by Lionel Blair. The programme was produced in Manchester by Nick Clark. Well, next week at this time, there's another chance to hear When Housewives Had the Choice with Russell Davis and Julie Covington. Do you remember all these old records? Well, you can hear them all in When Housewives Had the Choice.